Welcome everyone to the final office hour of the second week of the course. You all know the drill by now. If you have a question you would like to share, you can write that in the chat. And I'll be looking through the message board at the most recent questions. All right, quite a few questions on the message board today. I saw some of them are more focused on logistical questions. So I won't add an answer here, but exercises in the lecture notes are not graded. But they are still very useful. Excuse me. The kernel usually dies for one of two reasons. One, your server is out of memory. Two, you have a process which is running too long or infinitely. Usually the problem is number one. The data, or loading the data for the PW Mini project uses quite a lot of your server's memory. If you have other notebooks running, it's possible that you will not have enough memory to load the data. You can shut down notebooks that are running by going to the Running tab in your Jupyter Notebook directory and clicking the shutdown buttons. This should free up enough memory that you can load the data. Note that we have tested this mini project on the Jupyter Hub and it is working, and it is possible to load the data. Several of your fellow students have already begun working on it. Yeah. So I've gotten some emails and seen some posts about the kernel dying. If your kernel dies, restart it and try again. But it's useful to know that the kernel dies most often because you're out of memory. And the quickest way or easiest way to free up memory is simply to shut down other notebooks that you might be running. Let's see. Someone needs a original copy of a notebook. This is answered in another question, so I'm going to close this as a duplicate. So during lectures, I write and modify code live. Therefore, my notebook will end up having different code in it by the end than yours does, unless you are following my example, which can be difficult since I sometimes move rather fast. However, your notebooks start out in the same state as mine. Unless I have made modifications to mine beforehand. For the data structures videos, I re-recorded certain parts of the lectures. I may have added cells and or code off camera. All the necessary notes are included in the original notebook. And you should not feel nervous if there is a difference between what's in my notebook and what is in yours. I always start with a notebook identical to yours. Yeah, so try not to stress out about like discrepancies from between what happens in the videos and what's in your notebook. The lecture notes are quite complete, and so you're probably not missing much if there's a difference. The more important thing in the lectures are what I'm saying, because usually the words are giving that I am speaking are giving like an alternate picture from what is written in the text in the notebook. And what I say is what differs more significantly from what's written in the notebook than what I type compared to the code. Hello, Ali. Question about the difference between numbers is 0 and numbers equals 0. That's a very good question. So is a test of identity. Equals is a test of equality. I will try to come up with a good example to demonstrate this with. And I'm just going to open a notebook to do that. So I could have a list, or like list 1, we'll say, which is 0, 1, 2. And list 2 will be a copy of list 1. I ask if list 1 equals list 2, the answer is true, because the elements of them are the same. And that's what equality means between lists. All the elements are the same. However, if I ask if list 1 is list 2, I get false. And the reason is because they are separate objects in memory. They are distinct from each other. And I can see this by doing ID list 1 and ID list 2. And we can see these IDs are different. The ID is sort of like, it's related to where the object is stored in memory. Now, if I had list 3 equals list 1, so compare, list 2 was a copy of list 1. List 3 is equal to list 1. If I ask list 3 is list 1, we get true. And if we do ID list 1, ID list 3, we see they are the same. These are the same object in memory. So list 2 is not, because it's a copy. I made a new object that was a copy of list 1. But list 3 and list 1 are the same. So it's the difference between equality and identity. And generally, like, you know, something is something else is generally the same, equivalent to roughly. This is roughly equivalent to ID of something equals ID something else. So this is roughly equivalent to this. The one place where we use this a lot is if we're comparing to immutable data. So for example, we might have something like some data point, and that might be missing data. So it's maybe none. And we'll often write things like data is none to check if data is none. We could do data equals none, which would also give us true. But it's considered poor style. It's better, like, conventionally we write data is none. And the reason is because all nuns are the same, essentially. There is one none, and we can assign it to many names. So here we've assigned the name data to be none. So just a reminder, I've talked about this in previous office hours, but print and return do very different things. Print prints to screen, return returns a value. You cannot exchange one for the other, and you can't assign. Print doesn't create output for a function, is the main thing. Return returns an output. Print just prints it to screen, prints something to screen. We can have many print lines in a function. We can only have a single return. Well, when we return, we halt execution of the function is what I mean. I'm just trying to find an answer of mine where I talked about this in the past. It's a link to the current question I have open. Ah, here it is. Additionally, they will have to replace print prime number list with return prime number list. Remember, print and return do very different things. See the answer linked in the following comment for more about print versus return. Why is it adding these characters? This is dumb. There. Now, if I convert to a comment under an older answer, it still adds these characters. What the hell? All right, I'll just put this in an answer, whatever. You're very welcome. Okay. Which variable gives you the maximum number of items for the postal code? We will have to calculate it. That is precisely what the question is asking you to calculate. The portion that you have put in bold face is warning that it is possible that two different items will have the same count in a postal code, and they will both be the maximum count. For example, imagine we have the following item totals for a postcode. Postcode A10B. Item totals. Aspirin, 482. Like, what else could we have? Bandages, 482. Moxicillin, 313. Both aspirin and bandages have a total of 482 prescribed items in the postcode, and that is the maximum amount of dispensed items in the postcode. The instructions tell us that we should select the one with the alphabetically first name. In this case, that is aspirin, since it comes before bandages alphabetically. Is there an ugly workaround, seeing as it's enclosing a paragraph tag, that a closing paragraph might fix this? The problem is when I clicked the link, it was converting the paragraph tags into URL decoded characters. So it was like being interpreted as like part of the text of the link. But I think my ugly workaround was just to, instead of using a comment, to use an answer, which is fine in this case, I think. Yeah, maybe this would have worked. I'm not sure. That's correct. These can be floats. Just to expand, the grader does not discriminate between integers and floats ever. Unless, no, I don't think it does ever. I'm pretty sure it doesn't ever do that. There's one case where I thought it might, but I actually think it does not. Your output are not Mersenne numbers. They are the primes between 3 and 65. Mersenne numbers are numbers of the form 2 to the p minus 1. You must calculate the Mersenne number with the power P for each prime between 3 and 65. In other words, take your current list and for each number in it, take that number, or each number in it, raise 2 to the power of that number and subtract 1. Assertions are explained several times throughout the lectures, lecture videos. Assertions are special statements that do nothing when the asserted condition is true, and raise an assertion error if the asserted condition is false. If you write a correct factorial function, then this assertion or assert statement should do nothing. Removing the assertion will result in the cell returning true. If your factorial function is wrong, then the assert statement will raise an assertion error. Removing the assert statement, if your factorial function is wrong, will result in the cell returning false. This is demonstrated several times in the lecture videos. The main reason that we demonstrate it several times in the lecture videos is because we use them in the mini projects, and a lot of people get confused about what they're supposed to do. I see someone here has become confused about what assert statements do in the lecture notebooks. So I suggest going back to the lecture videos where for one of the notebooks where we use an assert statement, and probably at that time, I give an explanation of what assert does. How do we get a true answer return for the equals equals? So if, I will demonstrate. So import math. So now I can do math.factorial, for example, 3, that'll give me 6. And I can define a factorial function as well. This gives me, or should give me, oh, right, sorry. If n is 0, return 1. There we go. This function gives me the same result as math.factorial. If I compare math.factorial for some number, I get true because 6 is equal to 6. So I'm just comparing that the outputs of these two functions are the same. I can put this in a iteration where I test a whole bunch of numbers, say the numbers 0 through 100. Well, I would expect this to return true. I guess it doesn't, because it's within a for loop, and perhaps this for loop essentially doesn't return an output. But yeah, I figured this would return true. I guess it doesn't. Yeah, okay. So I'll modify that answer. That wasn't it. So it seems for loops do not return output. So if you remove the assert, nothing will happen regardless of whether the condition, nothing will happen regardless of whether your factorial function works or not. However, if this were not in a for loop, but instead we were comparing the equality of the functions evaluated on a single number, then the above answer is correct. Yep, small typo here. Just an additional comment. Errors like these can be easily discovered if you create some test cases. For example, you would get the wrong distance if you did point one, so point like 10, 0 dot distance, point minus 10, 0, right? So here we should get a distance of 20. You would get a distance of 20 squared is 400 times a half, 200 instead of 20. So it's always a good idea to create test cases for yourself if your code isn't working. And in general, you should develop that habit of making test cases. In fact, basically, pretty much everything I develop for the data incubator is tested. We write tests that check that every line of code we write functions correctly, that it does, that it executes without raising errors. And if it's some sort of application, that it does what it's supposed to do. So we have tons and tons and tons of code, often like 1/4 to 1/2 of the code in a project might be testing code. So writing tests is like really important. The below assertion checks for a list which has 2 values. No. I think this is a mistake. Smallest and is greater than P. Code is returning 3 when it comes to below throwing type error, unsupported operand type for modulus int and list. This is a little strange. Let me check something. Seems like maybe there's an error in that assertion, and I just want to make sure one way or another whether there is. So I'm going to have a quick look at the solution code to see why that assertion is the way it is. Okay, so smallest element unless it's false or not. Okay. And then let's see. So I have a different assertion in one of my notebooks. Yeah, no, the assertion here says 3. And then this is prime from list, not find next. I have different assert statements. Following find next is the definition of primes from list. For that, I have the following assertion. It appears that somehow your assertions for find next and prime from list have gotten mixed up. You're encountering an error because mark false I for I in range bool list I divided by p mod p because is receiving a list for the argument p, which I assume is coming from your find next function. Your find next function should return a single index, not a list. When posting a question, you must ask a question. Posting your code and stating that you are getting a low score is not a question. You must analyze your code, think about what could be wrong with it, and ask a specific question. Question threads, which do not contain questions, may be closed or deleted. You cannot simply post your code, say that it is not working, and ask for others to debug it for you. You must share your thoughts about the problem, and share what you have done to solve it. So again, I've been doing this a lot, and it feels a little bit like it's getting out of hand from my end. The amount of questions that are not questions, but instead are just saying, I can't solve this problem. I can't figure it out. Help. I am very happy for you all to help each other, and I'm very happy to help you all. But what I'm not happy to have happen is for people to do each other's work. The main way that I can tell that someone is putting in effort and trying to solve the problem is when they demonstrate that they've thought about the problem by asking a specific question. So that's why I require all questions on the message board to actually contain a question. Because this is like the main way I can like feel confident that people aren't just waiting for other students to share solutions, essentially. I want you all to help each other. I want you all to give each other advice, but I want everyone in the class to figure out their own solution using each other's advice. I don't want people just sharing code and running code that other people wrote. That's not okay. That's not going to help you learn anything. And that also should not earn you a certificate. In any college course, that would be called cheating. Compared to a college course, we are taking a very lenient stance in the degree to which you are allowed to work together. I think it is not much to ask that everyone who posts a question to the message board, that their question actually contains a question. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to request. However, if it continues that people post questions that don't contain questions, I will continue closing them, and eventually I will progress to deleting them. And I don't want to do that, and I don't want to be policing heavily what people share on the message board. So I really hope that this trend stops and that students start meeting this expectation that questions should contain a question. And if it's not clear what I mean by a question actually containing a question, after I've explained it in several different questions, you can ask that question. What do I mean? Why do I keep closing these threads? I would be happy to elaborate in written form on the message board. But I think given that this has come up quite a few times, and I've written about it in different ways, in different comments, and explained in words in the videos, that hopefully it's already clear. So this is asking about the arguments of Fibonacci mem. So the Fibonacci recursive function does not use a data structure at all. And therefore, there is no dictionary involved. It's not just that the braces are empty. There are no braces. The Fibonacci mem function uses a dictionary to memoize solutions that we've already computed in the Fibonacci sequence as we calculate subsequent terms. We can call Fibonacci mem 33 empty braces. And the first thing that will happen is we make a stack of recursive calls to Fibonacci mem B, where B is the dictionary N is the nth Fibonacci number, and D is the dictionary where we are storing calculated results. Until we hit N equals 1 or N equals 0, nothing happens except recursive calls. Then, since the first and 0th Fibonacci numbers are known, we add them to the dictionary B, and we return the appropriate number. Now, as we walk back up the call stack, we'll use the previously calculated results in D, which now at least contains the first and 0th numbers, to calculate each subsequent term and add it to the dictionary. Calling Fibonacci mem 33 empty brackets and Fibonacci 33 0011 return the same result. The only difference is that in the second case, we provide the 0th and 1st Fibonacci number in the dictionary before we make any recursive calls down to those numbers n. Eventually, our dictionary, when we reach the bottom of the recursive call stack, will contain all the results up to n. In other words, within the scope of our function, D equals 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 5, 6, 8, dot, 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 n, f sub n, where f sub n is the nth Fibonacci number. So yeah, this memoization thing is pretty complex, and takes quite a bit of thought to work through. Hopefully this answer helps clarify things. Again, there's a couple of questions I didn't get to about VC and PW. I'll take a crack at answering those over the weekend outside of office hours. And then, yeah, so I'll visit the discussion board and answer anything that's outstanding over the weekend. And then I will be back for more office hours on Monday.